Well, good evening, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Books and Books, right here in the cultural heart of Coral Gables. We are live on the internet. It's nice to be in Miami in January. I mean, I've got some dear friends in Tennessee I just spoke to today. The temperature is 9 degrees there. So if you're watching online, I wish you were here, but I'm glad I'm not there. My name's Steve. On behalf of everyone here at Books and Books, thank you so much for being here. Pick up a copy of our Books and Books newsletter. This will give you a breakdown of all the wonderful events we have at Books and Books every night of the week. Many of them now being live streamed through the internet, as you can see by the cameras. We have events every night of the week. We have kids events. We have Spanish events. We have celebrity signings, first-time authors, and many more. So there's usually something to be had for everyone here. As I say, there are some cameras pointed at the audience for the Q&A section of the portion tonight. So for the benefit of those who may be watching on the internet throughout the world, just make sure you're sitting next to who you're supposed to be sitting next to. I also remind you that flash photography interferes with the live streaming, so if you could refrain from that, I'd appreciate it. Again, I encourage you to visit our site at booksandbooks.com. Take one of our calendars. You can give us your email address, and we can send you updates of everything that goes on here at the store. And if you're watching, you can always call the store while the event is in progress. We'll get a book signed for you and ship it to you for free of charge anywhere in the U.S. So we appreciate that as well. Tonight, we're very happy to have with us Carolyn Klepser and Lost Miami Beach. Miami Beach has been America's playground for a century. Still one of the world's most popular resorts, its 1930s Art Deco architecture placed this picturesque city on the National Register of Historic Places. Yet a whole generation of earlier buildings was erased from the landscape and mostly forgotten. The House of Refuge for shipwrecked sailors, the oceanfront mansions of Millionaires Row, entrepreneur Carl Fisher's 5 grand hotels, the community theater, the Miami Beach Garden, and many more. Carolyn Klepser rediscovers through words and pictures the lost treasures of Miami Beach and recounts the changes that sparked a renowned preservation movement. Carolyn has spent nearly 20 years researching the architecture of Miami Beach for both local architects and as a consultant to the city. She has assisted in the designation of many of the city's historic districts and sites, one of which I hope is the Sterling Building. That's where the Books and Books of Miami Beach is located. So we hope that's one of them. Please give your warmest Books and Books welcome, Miss Carolyn Klepser.
I'm just going to need the remote control then. Thank you. That's fine. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. Thank you for those tuned in on the internet. My name is Carolyn Klepser, author of this book, Lost Miami Beach. I was called upon a little over a year ago by the publisher, History Press in Charleston, South Carolina, to write a book on the history of Miami Beach from a slightly different angle that had been done before. And the History Press has a series of lost places. They've done many books of lost places. So I was called upon to write Lost Miami Beach. This book was not my idea, but I was happy to do it. I wrote this book because I wanted to read this book, and no one had ever written this before, so I decided someone had to write it. It's about buildings that are no longer there. My purpose is not nostalgia. People ask, well, is Wolfie's in it, and Pumpernicks, and the mural in front of the Fontainebleau? But no, it's not really about that. In my research over the past 20 years, I've been researching buildings on Miami Beach that are still standing, of course, to help in their restoration. Wasn't looking for things that were gone, but along the way I came across photographs of places and buildings and people that I had never heard of and had no idea what they were or where they were, so it piqued my curiosity. So it took a bit of research to do this book, but here it is, for better or worse. I'm going to say this talk is not just about the book. The talk is about the topic of buildings that are lost, strictly within Miami Beach itself, not getting into other nearby towns or Miami. Also, I'll be showing you images this evening that are not in the book. There are many images that are in the book that are not in my presentation tonight, and also many images I was not able, for one reason or another, to get into the book. The publisher, when they called me to write this, was not aware that Miami Beach is celebrating its centennial this year. So by a happy accident, the book came out on the occasion of the city's centennial. Miami Beach became a town on March 26, 1915. So the city's planning a whole year of festivities, and so there's a website to tune in for those. Let me see if I can advance this. I think I'm going to have to aim between people here. Oops. No, I'm going to have to place myself a little differently, I think.
Sure it's page down.
Okay. Okay, there we go. Now, my talk is pretty much eventually going to go pretty much geographically from south to north through the city, but we're diverging right at first with this building. It's the earliest documented building known to have been built on Miami Beach. This was the Biscayne House of Refuge. Anyone heard of the Biscayne House of Refuge? You have. There's now a bronze plaque on the site where it used to stand. It's at 72nd Street on the ocean in Miami Beach. There were 5 houses of refuge built in South Florida in the winter of 1875 to 76. Over the next 10 years, an additional 6 were built. So there were a total of 11 houses of refuge built in Florida, but this was one of the original 5. Their purpose was to save shipwrecked sailors, people whose ships capsized for one reason or another, in storms especially, and people would drift ashore, but then there was nothing here. People would die of thirst and exposure since there was no civilization here at all. And that actually happened in the 1870s when a crew from a shipwreck was just discovered by accident by a beachcomber. And so the federal government, at that time it was the U.S. Life Saving Service, under orders of Ulysses S. Grant, built these houses of refuge to save people's lives who were shipwrecked and to get them back to civilization. So this is shows you how lonely the coast is in the 1870s. Oops, sorry, wrong direction. This way, okay. Here's a little close-up of the house. All of the houses were built to the exact same architectural plans. This is the Biscayne House of Refuge. Now, this photograph was taken in 1925. The United States Life Saving Service that built these houses became the Coast Guard in 1915. So at this time, it was a Coast Guard station. It was decommissioned as a house of refuge after World War I, because by that time, Miami Beach was a city, and if you washed ashore, you would just wait until a car went by on this, on this road. I'm sorry. I'm going the wrong direction. Okay. You see there's this road in the foreground. The ocean was behind the photographer here. It's looking west. And this road was built in 1917 along the ocean. I want you to remember this road because it's going to enter the story a little later. It was built by realtors who owned land in this area and couldn't access it to show it to their clients to sell it. So they got permission to build this road in 1917. So this photograph taken in 1925, there's already a road here, and you see there's utility poles back here. So it really outlived its purpose. I'm still mastering this, I'm sorry. Now there's one surviving house of refuge. The only one that's still left is near Stuart, Florida. It's the Gilbert's Bar House of Refuge, and it's now a museum, so you can go up there and see that. And our house of refuge was identical because they were all built to the same plans. Now one thing that happened in the course of events at the House of Refuge was the Coconut Plantation. Have you heard of that Miami Beach started out as a coconut plantation in 1882 to 83. There was a group of investors from New Jersey who decided to bring in about over 300,000 coconuts from elsewhere around the Caribbean, and brought the coconuts in here and floated them ashore from the ships and sent the crew ashore to plant the coconuts along the coastline from what's now Key Biscayne to Jupiter, Florida. And the coconut plantation failed, but it was the first opening up of the land, or the discovery of the area, if you will, be the first inroads of civilization in this area. And another important aspect of this coconut plantation project was that John Collins, one of the city's founders, was one of the investors in that coconut plantation. What we see here are the portable shacks that the coconut planters moved from place to place as they went up the coast. Now, this is another little building that was up in North Beach, in that area of Miami Beach, in the 1920s. The last keeper of the House of Refuge in the 1920s was a man named Frank Tootin, and even though it was no longer a house of refuge and Miami Beach was getting a little more civilized, he stayed on there during Prohibition to keep a watch out for rum runners. Now it was ironic because only a few hundred yards away from the House of Refuge was this speakeasy. This was called the Jungle Inn. It was a log cabin up at what's now 69th Street and Abbott Avenue. And it's the inside with the piano and the decor and the raccoon and crocodile skins on the walls. And up those stairs was a gambling parlor with roulette wheels, and it was a real den of iniquity that was raided in 1923. So that's part of our lost history. So from now on, we're going to go a little bit geographically from south to north. The House of Refuge we just saw was way up here at the north part of the city. You see the ocean being at the bottom of the picture here. We're looking, this is north at the right end. So the House of Refuge was up here in around 72nd Street. This is an interesting map from the 1935 City Atlas. And it shows where the red line was the original landmass of Miami Beach. It was originally a mangrove swamp, and everything to the west of this red line was filled in by landfill, including most of the west side of what's now South Beach that floods all the time. And the Sunset Islands were carved out. What's now Belle Isle, that was sort of a marshy landmass of mangrove swamp. It was more or less a natural island. But the other islands on the Venetian Causeway are entirely man-made. Star Island here, Palm Island, Hibiscus Island, were all dredged up from the bay bottom. People realized you could create lucrative real estate by dredging up the bay bottom and pouring it into retaining walls, and then you could sell the land. So these are all man-made islands. Also, Allison Island over here, we're going to see a picture of that. Allison Island was man-made. Lagos Island was man-made. Normandy Isle was a kind of marshy landmass, but it was bulked up with more dredging. So, another thing is I wanted to mention that Miami Beach is often called an island, and it is an island now, but originally it was a peninsula. It became an island when Haulover Cut, a little further beyond this picture, but Haulover Cut at about 100th Street was opened in 1925. That's what made Miami Beach an island. Before that, it was a peninsula, and it also included what is now Fisher Island. So what do we have here is Government Cut, where the cruise ships go out. And Government Cut was opened in 1905.
Fisher was joined? It was all landmass?
Oh yes, yes. This was all the same landmass until they dug Government Cut. Oops, I'm sorry. There we go. This is the opening of Government Cut in 1905, and the ocean is over here. And this is what will be the channel. And it was a big event that hundreds of people came over from Miami to see this big event, the meeting of the bay and the ocean. And the mayor of Miami at that time was John Sewell. And he was there as master of ceremonies, but at the crucial moment, the dredge stalled. So Mayor Sewell grabbed the shovel, and all the people helped him, and they scratched out this last little bit of land. And they barely got out of the way in time because the ocean rushed in, and within hours it had cut the channel. So it was quite an event. So this is Government Cut in 1905, but what I wanted to point out in this picture is this little pyramidal roof back here. Anyone know what that is?
South Point Park?
It's where South Point Park is now, but this little wooden building was Smith's Casino. Now the word casino means small house. It has nothing to do with gambling. But this little casino house, it was just an open structure with no walls. It was a shelter from the wind, rain, and sun for people from Miami who came by boat over here to spend a day at the beach. But there were no facilities at all. You could get boat service over there and go back to Miami in the evening. That was just a little shelter for the beachgoers. And it had been built in 1901 by a man named Richard Smith. Now it's confusing because a man named Avery Smith, who was from Connecticut, bought it in 1908 and expanded it and built many other things also in the area. Let me see if I get the right direction. Nope, I'm sorry. Yes.
Why did they make the channel?
Oh, for shipping. Government Cut was a direct shipping route to get to Miami. Otherwise, they had to go all the way around Elliott Key, and it was very shallow also. If you do have questions as we go along, it's probably easiest to ask as we go. Especially if it's a question about the picture that's on the screen at the time, so feel free to ask, because I'll never find it again. Now, over here, this is Smith's Casino again with that little pyramidal top. And as I said, it was built in 1901. This is a rival casino, Hardy's Casino. It was built by Sheriff Dan Hardy in 1913. And it started out as this little two-story plain building. This is a boardwalk that they built too. In 1920, Hardy's Casino expanded considerably and had these two towers that kind of complemented the pyramid of Smith's Casino. So that was the early days down in South Point. Now,
I just want to ask you a
yes.
quick question. I noticed it says Miami, Florida, and not Miami Beach on the back. of the
Well,
box.
that's a good point, because there was no Miami Beach till 1915. There
They
was no,
incorporated as a separate city. It
Didn't
was all
incorp-
Miami, right?
no, it was just unincorporated Dade County, I guess. Yeah, it wasn't part of Miami. It wasn't till 1915 that Miami Beach was incorporated as a town. It became a city in 1917. But yeah, that's probably why they say Miami. Well, you know, they still call Miami Beach Miami. It drives us all crazy. A lot of people in the rest of the world don't know that Miami and Miami Beach are separate cities. Now, you might have heard we had a hurricane in September of 1926, the Great Hurricane of September 1718. So this is a view right after the storm, Miami Beach after the storm, 1926, and this is looking west from the ocean down what is now called South Point Drive, but originally it was Biscayne Street. And so this is Smith's Casino. There's a little pyramid there, and his considerable additions, and the little Jansen swimsuit ad over here. And then here we have Hardy's Casino on this side with one of their towers, and it was somewhat wrecked quite a bit in the hurricane, but it did stay in business afterwards. What we see here is construction equipment for the pier. There was a pier built just at this time in 1926. They were in the process of building a pier that lasted until well into the 50s. At Biscayne Street. It became Minsky's Burlesque, and it was a servicemen's pier during World War II, but this was the construction of the pier in 1926. What I want to show you, if you can see here, you had the casino here on the beach, and then behind that was other projects of Avery Smith and his company, the Smith Company. They built a hotel called the War Inn, and then beyond that was the Biscayne Plaza Theater, and we're going to see those in a little better, little better detail. This is the Hotel War Inn. It was actually named the War Inn because Avery Smith's business partner was James War. And not much has been written about the Smith Company. They were really quite important pioneers in the city, and not much has been written about them. It's kind of a nondescript hotel, but it really was one of the earliest. This was designed and built in 1925. It was demolished in 1964. And it's on the south side of Biscayne Street or South Point Drive. It's where those condos are now. Right next to it, further west, was this movie theater, the Biscayne Plaza Theater. I'm really sorry I didn't get a picture of this into the book, but you're seeing it now. This was Miami Beach's second movie theater. We're going to see the first a little later on. It opened on Thanksgiving Day in 1926. So it was under construction at the time of the hurricane, and actually they had just installed the Kimball organ, because of course the movies were silent. So you always had Biscayne Street, which is now South Point Drive, right about where, what? South of First Street. Biscayne, it's the next street down after south of First Street, beyond the numbers. But it's gone. Biscayne Plaza Theater, built in 1926, opened on Thanksgiving Day. Oh, they had at the time of the hurricane, they had just installed the organ. and it was damaged in the storm, so it had to be sent back to the factory. So for their opening on Thanksgiving Day, they just had a full orchestra and a piano. This is a 1922 photograph of the building. You know, if you're taking a picture of or looking at a picture of a movie theater, you can tell the date by the film that's playing. This is a 1922 movie with Victor McLaughlin and Fay Wray. Now, the architect of this theater was George Wells, and he had studied in 1913 at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. And one thing I realized in looking at these buildings is we always assume that they're all Mediterranean. But they really aren't. I found a lot more French influence and Italian Renaissance in the early days than Spanish. This is really not a Spanish design. This has a lot of Beaux-Arts influence. I go into this a little more in the book. The School of Beaux-Arts, or the School of Fine Arts in Paris, was really very influential in architecture in Europe and the United States in the late 19th, early 20th century. Their approach was based on classical architecture, but it was embellished or prettified in a French way with these little busts, these little sculptures. You don't see all of these things here, but they had, we'll see more as we go along, but urns and shields and swags and medallions and a lot of decoration to pretty them up. And it's quite a distinctive style that I don't think is really appreciated much. Anyway, there's the Biscayne Plaza Theater. It was torn down in 1960. Here's an aerial view of this area. And we're seeing, this is a 132-foot wide strip of land that Avery Smith leased for years and years, and he built all his developments along it. First you had the Smith's Casino, then you have the War Inn Hotel, and then here's the Biscayne Plaza Theater, the little entryway. It's only one story, and then you go back into this is the auditorium part of the building. Back here was what was called Smith's Cottages, built in 1923 and 24. It was built as workers' housing for middle-class employees, just everyday people, something that was really lacking in a lot of the developments. And there were about 32 little cottages that were much less expensive than hotels. And then in the foreground, of course, you might recognize the Kennel Club, or the dog track for dog racing. That was built in 1928. This little clubhouse in a Spanish style was designed by Robert Law Weed, if you're familiar with him, quite a well-known architect. Oh, what I wanted to point out in this picture, right about here, right across from the movie theater, was Joe's restaurant. It became Joe's Stone Crab. Yeah, Joe Weiss's restaurant was right there. It's where Joe's Stone Crab is. 1913, I think.
And when did they close the dog track?
Oh, it was the dog track was remodeled later, but it was eventually torn down about 1960, I think. Another thing to show you in this picture is we have the War Inn that was part of the Smith Company's project here, that hotel I showed you. And right across the street from it was in the Ocean Beach area. This whole area was Ocean Beach, and this was the Smith Company property. But in Ocean Beach, this is a hotel called the Biscayne Collins. It was on the corner of Biscayne Street and Collins Avenue. There's a close-up of the Biscayne Collins Hotel. This was built in 1925, demolished in 1984. Yeah, it lasted quite a while. But here we see a lot of the Beaux-Arts decoration I was talking about, the little shields, these little spiral finials, the shield with swags and coins. Coins are the little block-like edging along the edges. It looks like blocks. Those are coins. And these were all from the Beaux-Arts school. So that's the Biscayne Collins Hotel. The architect was William Brown. We're going to encounter other things that he did. He was an architect from England, designed many of the early buildings. Now you might recognize the Macarthur Causeway here. Oh, yes. So it was built in 1920 as the County Causeway. It was named for Douglas MacArthur in 1942 as we were starting into World War II. So this picture is built sometime after 1922 because this is the Chamber of Commerce building. Right at the end of the, right as you get off the causeway, there's a Chamber of Commerce to welcome you. So the Miami Beach Chamber of Commerce was formed in 1921 and they built their building in 22.
How long did the cable car last?
Oh, that's an excellent question. The trolley, yes. Trolleys came along with the causeway. We got trolley service in 1920, and I described the routes that it took, and they evolved over the years in the book. The last trolley ran in 1939 because of the competition it posed to buses largely. And so we're down at 5th Street on the bay. Now across the street over here on the other side of 5th Street, we had this little building. See, here's the causeway coming in, and the Chamber of Commerce would be over here. So over here we have this. Anybody know what was at the other side of the causeway? Big tourist attraction. This was the Miami Beach Aquarium. Yeah, I discovered all these things. The Miami Beach Aquarium was built in 1925 by Carl Fisher's business partner from Indianapolis. His name was James Allison, and we'll have more things about him too. It was a seasonal aquarium. It was stocked with fish every fall, and every spring when the tourists left, they let all the specimens loose in the ocean again. So, but it only lasted, I'm sorry, I said it was built in 1925. It opened in 1920. It was sold in 1925 and torn down, so it only lasted for 5 years. So he built it in 1920. What?
I was going to say all the trees.
All those trees, yeah. Those are landscaping to make the building lots look attractive. And this is Alton Road, and this is Lennox Avenue, and that's.
Is that a photograph or an illustration?
It's a postcard that is actually a drawing, but it's drawn from a photograph. I know a little bit about the process of.
And those are lots. There's a house. Is that a house? Private
Oh,
house?
these, yes, they're little houses starting to sprout up here. So this postcard, I don't know the exact date of the postcard, but I know it's between 1920 and 25 because that's the only time the aquarium was standing. We have a little better picture of the aquarium here. It needs a little coat of paint. But it was really well respected. They did research and had some very interesting tropical fish in it. So that's James Allison's aquarium.
Is that James Allison of Allison Island?
Yes, it is the same Allison. Well,
And this is where the Bentley Bay is
yes, this
now.
is where the Bentley Bay is now.
When was it torn down after 5 years?
Oh, Allison sold the land to a man named Jerome Churbineau, who built the Floridian Hotel here. So after the aquarium, we had the Floridian Hotel, and that was torn down in 1987, and now we have the Bentley. So there are several generations of buildings on the lots in Miami Beach. We're not just talking about one thing. Here's a view looking east on 5th Street in 1921 from the head of the causeway. And over here we have Carl Fisher's real estate company. I haven't introduced you to Carl Fisher, but you might know that he was a millionaire from Indianapolis. He actually built the Indianapolis Speedway. He made his fortune originally in automobile headlights. He had the Presto Light Company. He and James Allison had the Presto Light Company and made millions of dollars, not from selling headlights, but from selling the patent to Union Carbide. And Fisher brought his fortune here and spent most of it creating Miami Beach. So this was one of Fisher's many realty companies, the Miami Ocean View Company, built in 1916 at the corner of Alton Road and 5th Street. Here we have the beach's first post office. We'll have a better picture of that in a moment. It opened in 1920. A little further down there was the Causeway Pharmacy that actually still exists. It's incorporated into that big box store, the Best Buy at the end of the causeway. If you go around to the far end of it, you'll see the Causeway Pharmacy and a little plaque about that on it. Here's a little close-up of the post office, 1920. Carl Fisher built the post office. Instead of waiting for the government to build it, he built it himself. It was torn down just about 15 years ago because this part of the city was not in the original historic district. The historic district ended at 6th Street. This was on 5th Street, so we lost this and some other very important buildings. This is one of the important buildings. This picture I couldn't put in the book because it was not suitable for, you know, putting into a book. It was just a very poor quality newspaper photograph. This was the Western Union office on 5th Street at the corner of Meridian Avenue. In later years, it became the Burgos Pharmacy. It was torn down in 1995. But this was built in 1925 as a Western Union office. And what was important about that, the nation's South American cables passed through here. It had a connection to Buenos Aires, and all of Western Union's cables to the east part of South America from all over the United States went through this office. And I've wondered if the cables are still underground, but I haven't found anyone to dig. It was torn down in 95. Unfortunately, it's still a vacant lot, which is what irritates me. I'm sorry, that's the wrong direction. Here's a little hotel called the George Washington. That was at the corner of 5th Street and Washington Avenue, built in 1924. The architect was William Brown. Saw him before. We'll see him again. You see all these little Beaux-Arts influence, the finials, the portrait medallion, and the swag, and the wording, and the it's got coins and urns and finials, and those are all the French Beaux-Arts style. The Mediterranean style, you have usually a red clay tile roof, and it's just, there might be a little bit here, but it's really not evident.
What year?
1924.
Are these considered to be luxury hotels at that time?
No, I think it was pretty much a middle class. Especially this neighborhood of Ocean Beach, was really aimed to middle class tourists. Some of the bigger hotels, Carl Fisher's hotels, were much more expensive and luxurious. But I would say this was an average middle class hotel. Now, people just didn't come for a few days or a weekend either. It was a big trip to get here, and you stayed for a week or months for the season. I'm sorry. Here's a view of 5th Street and Collins Avenue, and the hotel we have over here is the Haddon Hotel, built in 1922. It was the first building in Miami Beach built by Newton Roney, and you might be familiar with the Roney Plaza that he built in 1925, but this was his first building, the Haddon Hotel down on 5th Street. The architect was Robert Taylor, and Taylor designed most of Roney's projects. He didn't design the Roney Plaza, but he designed practically everything else that Roney built on Miami Beach. And then a little further down 5th Street at the ocean is Cook's Casino. We had Smith's and Hardy's Casino. We had another casino. The third casino was built further up by the Collins family, and we'll get to that in a minute. So this was the city's 4th casino, or 4th bathhouse, built in 1926. Now, before leaving Ocean Beach, I want to talk about 2 more hotels. They were on the bay side. And this one is just not written about very much, although at the time it was built, it was the 2nd tallest hotel in the state of Florida. This was the Fleetwood Hotel. Fleetwood on the bay. You see the bay is in the foreground here. It's not on the ocean. It was on the bay at 8th Street. And the architect had never been documented, but I found a signed rendering and discovered the architect was named Frank Newell. And it's hard to say what style this is. It looks to me like prairie style. I can also see some foreshadowing of the Art Deco style with the eyebrows and such. Here on the south wing, at the top of the 9-story south wing, was the dining room that was enclosed. And it was quite an elegant landmark.
Was this the one that ended up having a radio station in it?
I think the Flamingo had a radio station.
But not the thing.
I could be mistaken. No, I think you're right. I believe I did read. Yeah, I can't say for sure. I believe you're right. I think it did have a radio station.
Was this also the site of the original Curtis Aviation School on the beach?
Oh, that was nearby on 15th Street, I think, but I haven't really pinned that down.
Just a little north.
There was an airfield there briefly.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, it was in the general area. Thank you.
When was that torn down?
The Fleetwood. 1966. So 1924 to 1966. Most of the hotels I find don't last much more than 40 years. I have a theory about that. When a hotel is 40 years old, it's a little dingy and out of style, but it's not old enough to be quaint. And it's the danger years. So Frank Newell was the architect of this. I found that he also designed this hotel in Jacksonville. This is not Miami Beach. This is Frank Newell's Windsor Hotel, 1902 in Jacksonville, just to compare architectural styles. So Frank Newell, we had never heard of him before. Further south on the bay at between 5th and 6th Street, this was the Floridian Hotel. That's what was built in place of the Aquarium. Allison sold the land to Charbonneau, who tore down the Aquarium, built the Floridian Hotel there. In 1925, the architect was Samuel Butterworth, who was from Michigan. This was demolished in 1987. By that time, it had been renamed the Biscaya Hotel. It was the Floridian, renamed the Biscaya in the 1960s. And it was right at the end of the Causeway. The Causeway comes in here.
But they do have a condo named the Floridian.
Yes.
Is that the same piece of land?
Yes. Yes, that's right. Yes. Nothing left but the name. This is the lobby of the Floridian. And quite elegant Spanish style, out of wrought iron and fancy tiles and such. And there's a rendering. This is a rendering of the lobby. This has never been published before. I found this in the Florida room of the public library. And it's a rendering, meaning a drawing. It's not a photograph. But the Floridian had a domed lobby that was decorated with paintings on canvas. It was really quite elegant, and I'm told that the interior was largely intact at the time it was demolished.
But no air conditioning.
Sorry?
No air conditioning.
No, they don't have air conditioning, but
That's what made it.
well, it made it year-round resort rather than just seasonal. Yes, it was a big change, many changes. When air conditioning came in, not only did it make it a year-round resort, but it really changed architecture, because architects used to build for the climate. They had all these tricks to have breezeways and cross ventilation and shade and arcades. And then air conditioning came in and it freed them up because they didn't have to do those things anymore, but they used a lot of electricity. And now we're trying to be green, and they're trying to rediscover green architecture to design for the climate without mechanization. Anyway, I'm getting off the subject. Here's some people to put faces to the names I've been mentioning. This is Avery Smith down here. He was from Connecticut. He bought Richard Smith's casino and built it up considerably, and also the other buildings along Biscayne Avenue. Dan Hardy was a sheriff of Dade County, and he built Hardy's Casino, the rival casino, in 1913. Over here we have J.N. Lummis. The Lummis brothers were bankers, but J.N. Lummis was the first mayor of Miami Beach, and he and his brother developed the Ocean Beach area of Miami Beach. Lummis Park is named for them, yes. This is James Allison, Carl Fisher's partner in the Headlight Company, who built the Aquarium and Allison Hospital and other things. He died in 1928, so died at a young age. In the middle we have John Collins, and we're going to get into his developments next. John Collins was a little Quaker from New Jersey, rather short, elderly Quaker man, and was really one of our finest pioneers. We'll have a lot more on John Collins. You might be familiar with the Collins Bridge. John Collins was a horticulturist. His main interest was agriculture, and he was one of the investors in that coconut plantation we started out with. The coconut plantation failed largely because rats and rabbits would eat the sprouts as they came up, And also there was no way to harvest the coconuts on this 60-mile spread of coastline with no roads, so they had no way to really harvest the coconuts. So the plantation scheme failed, but John Collins, being an expert horticulturist, realized that other crops would do better here. So he came and bought out some of his partners on Miami Beach and planted the world's largest avocado orchard in the central part of Miami Beach. We'll see on a map in a moment. Now, in order to get his crops to market in Miami, where the railroad and the ship's port was, Collins did a couple of things. He built the Collins Canal, which still exists in Miami Beach. It was completed in 1913. I'm sorry, the canal was completed in 1912, and in 1913 he completed the Collins Bridge. It's where the Venetian Causeway is now, but all those islands on the Venetian Causeway were built later. When Collins built the wooden bridge across the bay there in 1913, it was open water, and at 2.5 miles long, it was the world's longest wooden bridge. And he had it about halfway done when he ran out of money, and that's when Carl Fisher entered the picture and lent him the money in exchange for some land. So Collins finished his bridge, and Carl Fisher had an inn to Miami Beach, and things went on from there. So this is the Collins Bridge when it opened in 1913, and it connected to exactly where the Venetian Causeway is now. Now Collins, well, once the bridge and the canal were completed, that also opened up the beach to development because they could bring building materials in also. Collins' daughter, he had several sons and a daughter, Catherine, who married Thomas Pancoast. So Thomas Pancoast was John Collins' son-in-law, and he was instrumental in development here also. He was the first president of the Chamber of Commerce. I think he was our third mayor. So Thomas Pancoast was a big name in our history as well. And this is the home that Thomas Pancoast built for his family on Lake Pancoast. If you're familiar with the beach, Lake Pancoast is at the south end of Indian Creek at 24th Street. It's right across the street from where the Roney Plaza was. And the Collins Canal connects it to the bay at the south end. So this is Lake Pancoast that they hollowed out a bit. And this beautiful two-story building built in 1914, one of the earliest houses.
Is it on sand?
It's pretty sandy, yup. There was a sandbank. Crocodiles used to sun themselves there.
Wait, so is that facing
This is
west?
we're looking north here. We're looking north here. Collins Avenue would be over here, and the ocean beyond
And
it.
this is actually Lake Pancoast right here?
Yeah, this is Lake Pancoast, and Indian Creek goes up north on this side.
Okay.
Let me see if I know when this was lost. It was built in 1914. I don't know what date it was demolished, but there's an apartment house there now. One of the earliest houses on the beach. Now, this was also built in 1914. This was John Collins' house for himself. And it was on the ocean, just a block east of his son-in-law's house. It was at 25th Street on the ocean. And he died in this house in 1928. Now, the year he built this house, 1914, was the year he was widowed. His wife, Rachel, died in 1914. 2 years later, in 1916, at the age of 78, John Collins married for a second time. Did you know that John Collins married when he was 78 years old? To a younger woman of 55, who was also from New Jersey. So he was quite a guy. We need to know more about John Collins. This was one of the earliest oceanfront hotels. This is the Breakers Hotel. It was just south of John Collins' house on the ocean at 24th Street. Also from 1914. So 10 years later, the Roney Plaza would be built just south of this. So this was one of the earliest hotels and one of the most expensive. It was $25 a night, which would translate to hundreds of dollars today. This was another development of the Collins Pancoast family. This rather rustic wooden building was the Miami Beach Casino. It was the beach's third bathhouse. We had Smith's, we had Hardee's, then we had this one, and then Cook's was the fourth. But this was on the ocean at 23rd Street. And It was built largely of driftwood. It was quite rustic. Carl Fisher bought it and took it over, and refurbished it considerably and built it up as the Roman Pools. So this was originally John Collins' Miami Beach Casino, redone as the Roman Pools. You've often seen pictures of the windmill in old photographs. The windmill was a pump to pump seawater into the casino's 2 swimming pools. This was the first bathhouse on the beach to have a swimming pool. The others followed suit afterwards. This was built in 1914 with a swimming pool, and then Carl Fisher in 1916 added a second swimming pool and did this very elaborate front. What I want to show you also in this picture are the 2 radio towers here. This was called a Marconi station, or early radio, built by the United States government in 1914 as an early effort in ship-to-shore communications. So this is 23rd Street. The Roney Plaza would be here later. But the bay is kind of marshy out here, and there's really not much there.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Was the beach private?
No.
None of it?
Well, around Millionaires Row we're going to get to, and that was kind of off limits to people, parts of it. But no, it really wasn't restricted. Yeah.
The white building in between the Marconi
This-
Towers, is that 309 23rd Street?
No, you mean the Palm Court?
Yeah.
No, this was an earlier building, I think, called the Casino Inn. The
But is
Casino
that
Inn.
where it kind of is?
It's kind of where it is, yeah. This is kind of where Walgreens is.
Okay.
And
So wait, where's Collins?
this is Collins.
Right there.
Yeah, this is Collins.
Wow.
And this is no, Alton doesn't even go over here. This is the Collins Canal going off to the bay. This became Liberty Avenue, but it was called Sheridan Avenue at that time. This is 23rd Street. You know how they say some streets are west 25th Street and west 30th Street? The reason you had to tell somebody it was west because this was your last chance to cross the waterway until you got up practically to Broward County, because this was the only bridge across the Collins Canal, and then you have Indian Creek, and there were no bridges. If you wanted to go to this area over here, you had to cross there or you were stuck, unless you had a boat. So that's why the streets are named west, because if it was west, you knew you had to get on the west side of the waterway by then. Oops, I'm sorry. Here's a little close-up of the Roman pools and the people at the beach. And you see the little Beaux-Arts influence there. Carl Fisher's favorite architect was August Geiger. He had a hand in the Roman pools. And he designed almost exclusively in the Beaux-Arts style. Here's another view of the swimming pools and the windmill. But one interesting thing I discovered about the Roman pools, it was also a social center. They had a lot of events there, parties and galas and balls. And this was a photograph in the City of Miami Beach archive, and it said on the back, Allies Ball. And I had no idea what that was. So we found in a newspaper, this was a ball held in February of 1918, and there were about 200 guests. It was written up in the newspaper. They came in costumes of the countries that were allied with us in World War I. So I thought, World War I began in Europe in 1914. The United States didn't get into it until 1917. So this is less than a year that we're in the war, and it would end in November. So it would end a few months later. So in the midst of the United States war effort, you had this ball with people in costumes. Uncle Sam here was the mayor of Miami. His name was Everest Sewell. Remember, we had John Sewell, who opened up Government Cut in 1905, but his brother Everest Sewell became Miami mayor later. The mayor of Miami Beach at this time was J.N. Lummis, but he was not on the guest list for this ball, so he missed it for some reason, or he was out of town or something.
Is that the Japanese flag?
Yes, Japan was on our side in World War I. Yes, and actually Jane Fisher, Carl Fisher's wife, came in a Japanese kimono. And I'm looking around here, that doesn't look like her. I think this is Jane Fisher at the very end in a kimono because it looks like her. I think that's Jane Fisher. So this is Everest Sewell and his wife as Mr. and Mrs. Uncle Sam. And Mrs. Tatum, he was a realtor, is Britannia and France. And it was just fascinating to read the guest list, also to look at the sumptuousness of the ballroom and the Roman pools. I am going the right direction now. So we're moving up to Lincoln Road now. This is looking east toward the ocean at the east end of Lincoln Road. This house here was Carl Fisher's first Miami Beach house. It faced the ocean. This is the back of it. This is where Deco Plaza is now. And then this was the home of John Hannon from New York. It was later owned by Frank Seiberling of Goodyear Tires. You have the outdoor tennis. But
That would be where the Ritz-Carlton is?
yes, this is where the Ritz-Carlton is, and Deco Plage, and another Walgreens. Now here's the front of Carl Fisher's house facing the ocean. He had an earlier house on Brickell Point in Miami, but this was his first Miami Beach house, built in 1914, really one of the earliest houses on the beach. The architect this has often been attributed to August Geiger, but that is not true. I found newspaper articles, 3 of them, that named the architect as George Pfeiffer, who's a German architect from Chicago, came here from Chicago. So George Pfeiffer, and this is really not a Spanish style. We think everything is Mediterranean. These are Tuscan columns. This is really Italian Renaissance style. It's very austere. It doesn't have a red clay tile roof. It's really not Spanish. My talk at Art Deco weekend is going to be more on architectural style. A little further west on Lincoln Road, at the northeast corner of Lincoln Road and Washington Avenue, this was Carl Fisher's realty office, the Alton Beach Realty Office, until in 1923 he moved into what's now the Van Dyke Building, but before that this was his office. And the little building behind it was partly Carl Fisher's, but that's where Thomas Pancoast had his office. And this building was designed by the great architects Keenel and Elliott, if you're familiar with them. Now, this is where the Bajwani Tower is now, if you remember that. A commercial building. The next slide, I call them slides because they always used to be slides. The next image is going to show the view looking south across Lincoln Road from the roof of this building. So this is the south side of Lincoln Road between Collins Avenue over here, Washington Avenue over here. This is where the CVS drugstore is and Alvin's Island. This is when this area was zoned for estates. You had the Fisher Estate and the Seiberling Estate and these other estates. Now, 3 of these houses, there are some palm trees and also a lot of Australian pines. You see Australian pines everywhere because they grow. No. All that was really here originally was mangroves. But they were brought in because they grew fast. And there's Pine Tree Drive. John Collins planted them along Pine Tree Drive as a windbreak for his avocado orchards. But 3 of these houses were built by Fred Osius. He was from Racine, Wisconsin, and he started the Hamilton Beach Appliance Company. You might be familiar with his blenders.
Oh.
So Fred Osius came here from Wisconsin and started the Osius Realty Company, really prospered in real estate. So he lived in this house himself, and the other 2 were built on spec. I'm interested in this house especially. The next image is going to be of this house on the south side of Lincoln Road. It was built in 1922. Now, what style would you say that is? Modern. It's Art Deco. And it's built in 1922. I maintain this is the first Art Deco building to go up on Miami Beach. Because, you know, the Paris Exposition, which is seen as the watershed of Art Deco, was in 1925. It wasn't really till then that the style came to the United States. But this house was designed by the architectural firm of McClanahan and Banker. They were a Philadelphia firm. They had started out as a kind of stodgy firm, Price and McClanahan. They built an arts and crafts style, but Mr. Price, William Price, died in 1916, and Ralph Benker became a partner. And his first employer had studied in Paris back when Art Deco was getting started at the turn of the century, before World War I. And so Ralph Benker brought the modern style to the Philadelphia firm. And so there you are. You saw it here first. The earliest Art Deco building I maintain. This is the front yard. It occupied 8 building lots. Now, this was demolished after the area was rezoned. It started out zoned for estates, and when the zoning changes, the buildings go. In 1940, the zoning was changed to commercial because the city was evolving, and Lincoln Road was what it was in 1940. Of course, it was a traffic street. It was not shut off to cars until 1960, but it was a very busy commercial area. A little further west on Lincoln Road is one of Carl Fisher's 5 hotels. I'm going to talk about the other 4 later, but this was his first hotel, the Lincoln Hotel. This was on the southwest corner of Lincoln Road and Washington Avenue. It's where the bank is now. This was torn down in 1940 for the bank. This was built in 1917 as the Lincoln Apartments. 2 years later, and it was 2 years later, this wing was added to the west. So Collins Avenue is over here. So the Lincoln Apartments and Lincoln Hotel. This part was designed by August Geiger. I noticed the 2 parts don't really match, and I think it must have been another architect. We haven't found out who designed that part. But the Lincoln Hotel was Carl Fisher's first of his 5 Miami Beach hotels. I also want to point out that the golf course went all the way down to Lincoln Road. The golf course, half of it still exists north of Dade Boulevard, but it originally went all the way down to Lincoln Road. But escalating property values, it just got built up and commercialized. After this area was rezoned in 1935 on the north side, there was a couple of blocks that were rezoned in 1935 between Washington Avenue and Drexel Avenue. And at that time, in 1940, this little bank appeared on the northwest corner of Lincoln and Washington. This is where the Bank of America is now. But this little 1-story domed bank was designed by Roy France, one of my favorite architects. There's a lot more on Roy France in the book. But that little bank was...
Did he do the post office? The current post office? It looks similar to that.
Oh, no, it's just the style of federal Deco.
Oh,
Yeah. Or Depression Moderne. Yeah.
Would you like a little of your water?
Oh, yes, I would. Thank you. No, the post office on 13th Street was designed by Cheney, was his name. He was a federal architect.
It looks very similar.
It does. It's the same style, but different architect. Thank you. This was demolished in 1955 for the present Bank of America. That's there. A little further west on Lincoln Road, there was a school. Who knew there was a school on Lincoln Road? This was the Eunice Martin School, designed by August Geiger in 1919. And it was at the northwest corner of Lincoln Road and Jefferson Avenue. It was moved in 1924 because at that point, Carl Fisher had just built the Van Dyke Building and moved his office over there, and he decided at that point that Lincoln Road was going to be a very fashionable shopping street, the Fifth Avenue of the South, and he didn't think it was the right place for a school. So this building was moved. There is a long tradition of moving buildings. I enumerate several buildings in the book that were moved. Perhaps it's an idea whose time has come again. The house was just recently moved on Star Island. I went to the moving. It's quite an event, but I hope that opens people's hearts and minds to the possibility of moving something instead of tearing it down, because they did it a lot in the past. This house was moved around the corner to Michigan Avenue and converted into a residence, but it was demolished in 1951 for a parking lot. Well, you know, you need a place to park. On its original site at Jefferson and Lincoln is where Russell Pancoast designed the Mead Building, where the Victoria's Secret store is now. in 1928, so that replaced this little school. Now this is really interesting. This is a little further west on Lincoln Road. The Community Theater was the city's first movie theater. It opened in December of 1923. It was designed by Martin Hampton, another one of my favorite architects. He designed many buildings in Coral Gables and elsewhere. Martin Hampton was really quite prominent in the Mediterranean style. Now, you notice I don't use the term Mediterranean revival because that's not what it was called, and it really was not a revival style. There was no Mediterranean style previously that they were reviving. The way this style came about, and this was a style of choice in Florida and California in the 1920s, architects would go to Europe and travel around Spain and Italy and North Africa and even the French Riviera, elsewhere around the Mediterranean basin, making sketches of the buildings, the local architecture. They would come back here and put them together in odd ways to suit their clients, and it was really a composite of various elements from that part of the world. It really wasn't a revival, it was an invented style in the 1920s. The term Mediterranean was coined by H. George Fink, who was George Merrick's cousin. I'm sure you know George Merrick. They never called it a revival, and people even now say that it's a misnomer to call it a revival. So if it's not correct, I think we should stop using it, and some of us have started to just say Mediterranean. What we should call Mediterranean revival now are the high-rise condominiums that are painted in ochre with strips of red clay barrel tile and Palladian windows and all the balustrades in imitation of what they were building in the 20s. This was Mediterranean. What we're building now is Mediterranean revival, but that's just me. Oh, okay, great. Oh, well, we'll press on. We'll press on, yes. Let's see. This was, the auditorium part of this theater was demolished in 1950. But the last remnants of the storefronts around it were just demolished last year, and it's where the new Gap store is now. This is looking west on Lincoln Road from Alton Road. This is the Van Dyke Building.
Which is the Van Dyke?
This. I'm sorry, I said west. Excuse me. Thank you. I wanted to know if you were listening. We're looking east from Alton Road towards the ocean. This is the Van Dyke Building, and this was the Altonia Hotel from the 20s. Over here was a First National Bank by H. George Fink. This is where the 1111 parking garage is now, and this is where the movie theater is now. And you see there were cars going up and down Lincoln Road. This is a little close-up of that bank where the parking garage is now. And this is, you see, the neoclassical style. This is not Spanish at all. It's classical revival. This is a map from 1914. We'll press on a little quickly, but you see, 1914, Miami Beach was not even a town yet. You had Ocean Beach down here. Alton Beach was Carl Fisher's territory. Miami Beach was what the Collins and Pancoast family developed. The only link across the bay was the Collins Bridge at that time, and the only island was Belle Isle. So in the 1930s, you see how all these islands were constructed. By that time, the Venetian Causeway replaced the Collins Bridge. The County Causeway was built in 1920. The 79th Street Causeway. Can't remember the date of it, sorry. In the 1930s was the 79th Street Causeway. Now we're getting into Carl Fisher's 4 other hotels. He had the Lincoln Hotel on Lincoln Road. His second hotel was the Flamingo Hotel on the bay at 15th Street. The architects were Rubush and Hunter from Indianapolis. This is the lobby. Had the mural of flamingos by artist Louis Fuertes. This was his third hotel, the Nautilus. This was up at 44th Street on the bay. Most of his hotels were near. Yes, this became a military hospital during World War II, and it never reverted to hotel use after that. It became Mount Sinai Hospital and was torn down in the 1960s because it was just not suitable for hospital use anymore. The architects were Schultz and Weaver. This was really their first big project, Schultz and Weaver architects. They went on to do the Roni Plaza, the Coral Gables Biltmore, the Freedom Tower, And in New York City, the Waldorf Astoria Hotel and the Pierre and the Sherry Netherlands. They were really wonderful architects. This was Carl Fisher's fourth hotel, the King Cole on Lake Surprise up at 47th Street in 1924. It became the Miami Heart Institute after the war and was torn down after that. The last remnants of it went recently. This is an aerial view of the King Cole Hotel. This is the Biscayne Waterway, Lake Surprise. These are the polo fields for the Nautilus Hotel. This is just another world. It's just, this is Carl Fisher's fifth hotel, the Boulevard. This was on Dade Boulevard. Dade Boulevard is here. This is Meridian Avenue. It's a triangular lot. This was by William Brown that we met earlier, the architect down at the South End, architect from England. Oh, it's torn down. No, they built a new condo there a few years ago.
On the corner of Dade and Meridian?
Uh-huh. This was demolished in 1980. It was a vacant lot for a long time, and they built a condo on it now. This is a very interesting map. We don't have a whole lot of time anymore. This is a map I found among Carl Fisher's correspondence in the Historical Museum. I encourage you to go there and look around their library.
Where is that?
In History Miami in downtown Miami on West Flagler Street, 101 West Flagler Street. You see, these were John Collins' orchards. These are the orchards, his avocado orchards, and they're starting to be developed. This is the early 20s. They're starting to be sold up for building lots. There's a little close-up of this area that fascinated me. This is 41st Street. There's a Negro colony. There's the dairy. This is the Snowden residence that Harvey Firestone bought in 1923, but I'm going to show you more of the Snowden estate. What fascinated me was the city limits were here at 46th Street. When Miami Beach became a town in 1915, that's where it ended. And it took me 2 years to find out when the city limits were changed, so there's a story behind that. This is the dairy they just mentioned. This is Carl Fisher kept cows to provide milk and butter for his hotel guests. There's a close-up of the dairy. It was on 41st Street at Chase Avenue, where the school is. This was a building, this fascinated me. This was the Miami Beach Garden. I'm not talking about the Botanical Garden. This was an auditorium that was built in 1924, designed by August Geiger. It was the largest hotel in the city at that time. And it was on 41st Street. This is 41st Street, and this is the bay. This is where the Untitled Causeway goes out now. But where Garden Avenue is with St. Patrick's Church is on Garden Avenue. It was named for the Miami Beach Garden. It was an enormous auditorium. This photograph was taken after the 1926 hurricane. There's a little close-up of it. And it's Beaux-Arts style. The elephant was Carl Fisher's elephant Rosie, and the keeper was a black man from Tennessee named Aaron Yarnell was the elephant keeper. So this is what was originally called the Snowden Estate. It was built by James Snowden, an oil millionaire. Harvey Firestone bought it from him in 1923, so you might know it better as the Firestone Estate. And it was on the ocean at 44th Street. It was torn down to build the Fontainebleau in its place in 1954. The architect was Herbert Bass from Indianapolis, another Indianapolis connection. There's many of those. And it's Renaissance style. This is the interior. That's the loggia. So there it is, just before its demise as the Fontainebleau goes up around it. I'm going to skip through this. There's the story of Millionaire's Row. Starts with Ocean Drive. Remember back at the beginning with the House of Refuge, that road was built in 1917. This was Ocean Drive. This is Ocean Drive north of the Firestone Estate, north of the Miami Beach city limits. It was one of the most popular drives for people all over Miami. This was a favorite place to come for picnics. Here's a Sunday picnic on Ocean Drive in early 1924. Now the problem was that Carl Fisher owned this land. It was it was north of the Miami Beach city limits, and Carl Fisher wanted to sell these lots to his wealthy friends to build their winter homes here, so he'd have Millionaires Row. But they're not going to build their winter home when people are driving up and down the ocean front in front of their house. So he wanted to get rid of that road, and he fought tooth and nail to get rid of it. They were dynamiting it at night. They were putting up barricades. And, he had one gentleman named Eugene Couture built his house on the road in 1924. Here's the road, built his house on the road, trying to close the road. So eventually what happened was Carl Fisher got the city to move the city limits up to 87th Terrace, and then it was under their jurisdiction and they closed it. Well, Carl Fisher built an alternate route along Indian Creek. He did provide another road for people to use. He just wanted to free up the beachfront for his wealthy friends. This is a home, one of the homes of Millionaires Row. I have a chart with all 40 of them with their architects and dates. This is by Keenel and Elliott in 1925. This was at John Hertz, who had Hertz Rent-A-Car and Yellow Cab Company, bought it later from the original owner. And this was John Ford, who owned a chemical company in Detroit, and his home by August Geiger, 1927.
What street is it, like what number?
There's a whole list in the book, around north of the Firestone Estate.
So it'd be like 46.
The McAuliffe house, this was torn down to build the Eden Rock. So it was around there. And this was a little further north. This was the Warner estate. No, the Griffin estate, it was later bought by Albert Warner, who was one of the Warner brothers of movie fame. And this was also torn down to build the Eden Rock. It's just north of the Fontainebleau. And then this is an aerial view of several of the estates. This was Walter Briggs, who owned the Detroit Tigers for a while. This one was the Warren Wright estate. Oh, this was at 5151 Collins Avenue. So this is where the Seacoast Towers apartments are. And Warren Wright, who owned this estate, was the owner of Calumet Farms, the thoroughbred racing farm. And Indian Creek is over there, and the ocean is down at the bottom. We're pressing on. This is the Walter Briggs estate at 5151. This is Allison Island, and Carl Fisher created Allison Island and named it for James Allison, but Allison himself built the hospital after he sold the aquarium. And Carl Fisher died at the Allison Hospital in 1939 of complications of alcoholism. But you see, there was nothing up there. And it's now where the Aqua residential project is now. This is another view looking north from Allison Hospital here. This is the Doughville Hotel. We have a Doughville Hotel now, but this was the first Doughville Hotel that burned and was demolished in 1956. But this was built it opened in January of 1926. It had the largest swimming pool in Florida filled with salt water from the sea. Yes, it was quite, the Doughville.
It was?
Yeah, it was the Doughville. It was replaced by the new Doughville. These are a few odds and ends. We're nearing the end, sorry. These are a few assorted homes and hotels that we're ending up with. This was the winter home of J.C. Penney. It was on Belle Isle. And there was another sumptuous home also on Belle Isle. On the south side of Belle Isle belonged to Dr. Joseph Adams. And this was the music room of the Adams estate with a huge organ and seated hundreds of people. This was originally the Club Lido on Hibiscus Island. You might remember that. It became the Rod and Reel Club. And it was demolished not too long ago because of a quibble, because of wasn't really suited for a residence, which was all it was zoned for, and they weren't able to reuse it as it was. So it was torn down fairly recently. You might be familiar with this. This is a recent demolition. This was the J.W. Popham House on Star Island. It was designed by Walter DeGarmo in the 20s. And there was a big fuss about it. But in Miami Beach, private residences are not protected unless people ask for individual designation. We respect, well, there are municipalities around the country that will designate a property even against the owner's consent, but that's not what the law is in Miami Beach. And so there's pros and cons on both sides. I make my argument in the book about this too, but it was really lovely. Walter DeGarmo was just a wonderful architect as well. This was the home of J. Arthur Pancoast, one of John Collins' grandsons. It was built on the ocean at 29th Street in 1919. It was moved a few blocks away and was eventually demolished, but there's another building that was moved. It was moved in order to build this hotel, the Pancoast Hotel. This was on the ocean at 29th Street. That was opened in 1923. It was really the first grand hotel on the ocean. It was demolished in 1953 for the Seville Hotel that was built in its place. It's being refurbished now. This is quite magnificent. One of the wonderful Mediterranean-style buildings by Martin Hampton. We know Martin Hampton himself toured Spain and made sketches, and he was really a master of the Mediterranean style. I'm sorry, wrong direction. And then we have the Roni Plaza, 1925. Architects were Schultz and Weaver, and demolished in 1968. I have two post-war hotels here. They're not in the book, but the Algiers was on the ocean between 25th and 26th Street. This is Lake Pancoast, if you're familiar with that. It was just north of the Roni Plaza. The Algiers was designed by Henry Hohauser in 1951 with additions by Morris Lapidus. The storefront additions were by Morris Lapidus in 1954. It was demolished in 1980. There's a condo in its place now. This is the Montmartre Hotel that was built up on some vacant lots that were on Millionaire's Row. They were lots that were vacant, however. It was built in 1958. The architect was Melvin Grossman. I discovered, by the way, that Melvin Grossman was the nephew of Albert Annis, if you're interested in that. So the Montmartre, and here it is at night, is the wonderful post-war modern style. Built in 1958, it was demolished in 1982, and on its site now are the Blue and Green Diamond, if you're familiar with those. But it was torn down long before that. It was not torn down for the diamonds, it's just on the same site. This was the Whitman Hotel by Roy France, 1935. It was up at 33rd Street on the ocean, and a beautiful Art Deco style. This is where the Faena project's going on now.
Is
But
that the same Whitman from the harbor?
yes. Well, Stanley Whitman's father built this. Roy France worked for Stanley Whitman's father, William Whitman, the publisher in Chicago. Built in 1935, demolished 1963. Didn't even make it 30 years. This was the Sands Hotel. This was also by Roy France in 1939. This was on the ocean down at 16th Street. And you see just at the edge here was the New Yorker Hotel that we'll see here. The New Yorker was right next to the Sands. They were both torn down. The New Yorker was torn down first in 1981, and the Sands followed in 1992, and it's where the Lowe's Convention Center Hotel was built. So even after we had a historic district, we were still are losing buildings. This is the Senator at 12th and Collins. This was really what Barbara Capitman, the founder of the Preservation League and the person who got South Beach put on the National Register of Historic Places in 1979, she saw this as the watershed battle that was over this hotel that was lost. Designed by Elmery Dixon in 1939, demolished in 1988. So it didn't even make it 50 years.
And that's the tides on the ocean.
That's the tides behind it, yes. What's irritating about this is it's still a parking lot. It's still vacant. This is, I'm sorry to end with this. This is the death of the Roni Plaza Hotel in 1968. And this is the death of the Floridian Biscaya Hotel at 6th Street at the end of the Causeway. Hmm?
The Breakstone Hotel?
Oh, the Breakstone Hotel. Oh, the Break what? No, I don't know. No, this was the Floridian. This was the one with the fancy dome in the lobby. And this was the last of the grand hotels of the 1920s to go in 1987. And I'm ending up with, this is a little architectural detail from the Floridian that was ground to dust. So this little whimsical face still exists. Yeah, so it was very depressing writing this book. It's really very sad.
Carolyn, what
Yes.
I noticed a lot is, especially the original buildings from Lincoln Road, is very similar to the architectural style of Worth Avenue in Palm Beach.
I was thinking the
Similar to Worth that, yes. Yeah, they were, yeah.
So how was Palm Beach County able to preserve those two-story buildings, and who was instrumental in allowing this to happen in Miami Beach and for being able to preserve it like in the city of Palm Beach?
I don't know much, I know nothing about Palm Beach's preservation efforts. I really don't. I would guess they have a strong one. That's an excellent question. I don't know the answer why we tear down what we do. We have to choose what's important to us and fight for it and, well, enact legislation that will protect it. Like, do we want properties to be designated even against the owner's consent? And, you know, if you're the owner, would you like that or not? But it keeps your neighbor next door from building a McMansion next to you. So, yeah, it's topics to discuss. Yes.
Other than postcards, what was your major source of these old photographs?
Oh, the photographs. My sources for photographs. Arva Moore Parks, you might be familiar with, a wonderful Miami historian. She and I co-wrote a book back in 2002 called Miami Then and Now, and she became my mentor. She has a wonderful archive of photographs, and many of them came from her. Another wonderful source was the City of Miami Beach Historic Archive, and they gave me free use of their photographs. It's an untapped resource. It is available to the public. It's a little hard to access. They're in the process of cataloging it and making it more accessible. Also, the Florida room of the public library downtown with the Romer collection is excellent. I also have a personal friend, some of you may know, Larry Wiggins, has the world's best postcard collection of Florida. You know Larry Wiggins, yes. He gave me many of his postcard images and also scanned them for me because I'm not a computer person. So Larry Wiggins should be really the co-author of this book. He helped me so tremendously. So here and there is the answer.
Folks, we're going to wind up the live stream portion of the event right now because we're out of time for the live stream. We're going to continue with the questions. So
happy to
stick around, take some
Thank you.
questions. We'll sign some books. But for those of you watching online, give us a call. We'll get a book signed for you. Thank you.